Hello, welcome everyone to the webinar. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Mike Beach. I am a solution architect here at Worksoft. And prior to joining Worksoft, I had spent about 15 years doing SAP implementations. So both as a customer, as a consultant, and I actually worked for SAP prior to joining Worksoft. So a lot of experience in SAP projects, how they run, and with the advent of S/4HANA and really seeing the uptick in the adoption, I think this is a great time to talk about how is this different from what we've seen in traditional SAP implementations. So for today, what we'd like to talk about is just to start off with some perspective about testing and where we sit in the marketplace. We're going to look at some of the key considerations for S/4HANA implementations, for testing S/4HANA and looking at methodologies. Then we're going to talk about what does change management mean in this new world, and what does ongoing change management look like. We'll round out with Worksoft's approach, and we'll look at some demos of Worksoft products and how they apply in this, and then we'll go to the Q&A. So to start off with, to set some context for this webinar, right? This is the key testing considerations for S/4HANA. So when you're thinking about that, we really want to make sure we step back and think about what is testing, right? Because testing is a very broad topic. And if you look at testing applications and products that are on the marketplace, they really run the gamut. It's very widespread in terms of capabilities and what kinds of testing you do. So to put this in perspective, when we typically in the past talk about testing and you talk about Agile and CI/CD, a lot of that kind of testing is typically been focused on really the right side of this presentation, right side of the slide, where we're talking about building a single application. It's very much focused on the development, making sure that the code works. You're doing these incremental builds, moving things to production in an incremental fashion. There's a lot of very vertical testing, right? You're making sure that the application works from database to application to UI. It's very, very much focused on ensuring that all of the pieces and parts hang together correctly and are functional. It's typically done by smaller teams, right? Agile teams typically tend to be very small in comparison to something like an SAP implementation. So you've got a much smaller group of people to organize with, and so in those Agile scrums, you're much more focused, shorter delivery cycles. But really, in thinking about it, in that type of testing, we're really focused on, does the application work? Does the code all run, right? It's very different from the kind of testing that we're doing when we're looking at implementing enterprise applications. So if you've been in the SAP world, right, you understand that this is a different, it's a different world that this exists in. It's different kinds of testing. We're not looking at testing a single application. We're really looking at multiple applications, right? Multiple SAP modules that are have to be integrated to ensure that you are able to run the business. And that's really what the testing is focused on, is achieving the business outcomes, ensuring that your business process continues to work. We're not focused on, does the application run? SAP has already tested the application. They've delivered a working application to us. They've already done the code testing. So what we're really focused on in these projects is, how do we customize? How do we integrate and implement these applications so that we achieve that business process, right? So it's a much different type of view in terms of what we're trying to test. We're not looking at, does the application work? We're looking at that horizontal end-to-end testing, typically not just within SAP, but across an entire suite of applications that are required to accomplish that testing. The teams are much, much larger, right? It's not 6 to 8 person teams. We're typically looking at SAP projects, much, much larger sizes. So the communication, the coordination is much more complex. And these are really transformational projects. And what you'll see is that we're moving into the world of doing Agile for enterprise applications, which is really encompassed in SAFe, the Scaled Agile Framework. So when we're talking about where we sit in this, Worksoft very much sits on the left side of this slide. This is the focus of our platform. And that's what we want to say is, when we're looking at what is the value of doing this type of enterprise business process testing, it really is about ensuring that the business works, right? I implement SAP, I switch from one application to another, I make an upgrade. Can I still ship product? Can I still take orders? Can I still bill, right? So it's a different focus around what we're wanting to make sure we achieve. And there's recently been a white paper published that talks about, the importance of enterprise business process assurance. And what it says is that, the end-to-end tests address these risks that those typical application level or subsystem tests really don't address. For example, we might make a change in one application, test it within that application and think everything is just great, but not realize the fact that we've actually broken something in a downstream application that's part of an overall business process. So was I successful in my testing? Well, yes and no. The application test worked, but I broke the process. This is what we're really focused on, is ensuring that end-to-end business process is continuous and that we don't break it. So if you're interested, we have a link here to this publication that was recently put out, and I think it's in the materials that you'll be able to get from the webinar. So with that as the background, right, we're looking at enterprise applications, testing enterprise applications. We think about what are some of the key considerations for SAP S/4HANA. One of them is we were talking about a hybrid, modular, and a loosely federated architecture. You might say, well, wait a minute, SAP's always been modular. It has been, right? It's a slightly different take on it now, though. So we'll look at some of that. We have changes to business processes. We have a new user interface, SAP Fiori. We have a new implementation methodology, SAP Activate. And then one other point to consider is the frequency of product updates that will be coming from SAP. So if we start and think about how those are going to apply, we realize that, in moving to S/4HANA, businesses see a tremendous opportunity, but with that opportunity also comes some risk. And that's the goal of the testing. That's the goal of automation across this, is to reduce the risk of these kinds of really significant transformational projects that enterprises are undertaking. So looking at the architecture, everyone would recognize the picture on the left, the traditional SAP ERP, right? ECC 6. That's where we've always seen we had that central component, everything on one platform. Well, there are certain things that have to be moved into other platforms, CRM, SRM, all of that typically running with the SAP GUI. SAP over time, of course, evolved with the portal with web front ends to some applications, but very much more of a monolithic type of application. What we've got with S/4HANA really is a much more complex, federated and hybrid type of model. So, for example, you may be running S/4HANA in the cloud. You might run S/4HANA on-premise. You might be running SuccessFactors, right, which is a cloud-based application. You'd be running any one of a number of other SAP applications that are also in the cloud. So when we're looking at business processes that we have to test, we're not just testing things that run across a single implementation type. We've got to look at these hybrids of cloud and on-premise. The other things that come into this, right, obviously we've got a lot of integrations. Some of these integrations are built in by SAP. Some are handled by their own integration that they've built. You might have to build some of your own. And then you've got the Fiori interface. All of this, when looking at the right-hand side compared to the left, is there's a lot of change, right? And so with that change, we have to be able to manage that. So we've got change on the application architecture side. We also have changes from the existing traditional ECC business processes. One of the promises of S4 that Hasso Plattner talked about years back was we will be able to create new processes. SAP themselves saw that they had to do something to simplify the application so that they could modify and move at faster speeds for their customers. So they looked at how could they streamline the application. It all began with HANA. implementing the HANA database, then taking advantage of that and re-architecting the core ERP that would sit on top of that to have new processes and the ability to create new processes much faster than they had been in the past on the ECC platform. We have new processes. We also have streamlined processes. Some of the things they've done is they've been able to simplify, take steps out of processes. They've been able to redesign the processes. For example, in some cases, you might have a business transaction process where someone is working and then they have to step over and go run a test in BW and then come back, use the results there to continue on with their process. Well, SAP has now built new processes that take those analytical functions and actually embed them within the core process itself. So it's new ways that people are going to be doing their jobs. In addition, they've also created role-based process flows. So depending upon whether you're a power user versus a very casual user, you might get a slightly different view of a process. It might be a more simplified view if I'm just a casual user. And then finally, the real-time rather than batch. So in many ways, SAP ECC is very much a batch-oriented system. There are a number of jobs that have to be run that can take overnight, can even take sometimes up to days. Well, with S/4HANA, they've been able to simplify the database and have taken out a lot of those batch processes. So now what they've really enabled is real-time processes. And so if you think about that from a business standpoint, it means that you can fundamentally rethink the way you do things as a business. Then take that and think about the fact that we're going to fundamentally re-architect something that we do as a business process, but it's one part, as I said, of this end-to-end flow that crosses multiple applications. So when we think about the change of S/4HANA, we have to think about it within that context. It's the S/4HANA change, but it's also how does it impact everything else within that business process. Then we have changes to the user interface. Fiori, I'm sure a lot of you have already seen, if not worked with Fiori. It's much prettier than the traditional SAP GUI. We all got to know and love, hate the SAP GUI. Very functional. Fiori is tailored for the user, right? Fiori is built around role-based flows. It's built around role-based interfaces for the users. So it's tailored and it's customizable and things are simplified. When it comes to automating it for automation tools, it presents quite a challenge. The web GUI was fairly stable, easier to implement test automation. With Fiori, we have very complex pages, responsive pages. From a test automation standpoint, it's changing. And so if you're looking at automating, you have to be able to handle all these changes that are coming through. And not every product, not every approach is going to be able to handle this. So you have to have something that really gives you the flexibility to be agile and work with the changes as they come from SAP. We dive just a little bit deeper on Fiori, because I want to talk about the fact, a point here, just to emphasize, when we say we're moving into a new world, what does this mean for us? So if you look at this, this is just some images from SAP. On the left-hand side, we have just really a simplified view of the Fiori application and how it is built, right? So you have a Fiori front end server. You have SAP UI5, you have the gateway. All that ties into the back end. We have multiple new components that all go into generating this web interface that we're working with. Much more complex than we ever saw in the past. On the right-hand side, that's a deeper dive look. That's at what it actually looks like behind the scenes, the componentry of Fiori. And really, this is just UI5, right, which is one part of the Fiori interface. Think about the fact that at any point in time, these can be changing. You can be getting updates to the front-end server, to the gateway, to the back end. So lots of change coming as part of this implementation. Okay, so we've talked about some of the changes that we've gone through. I think, Heather, we wanted to stop and go to a couple more questions.
Great. Okay, so we have a few more poll questions here. Our first poll, How many major SAP releases, new functionality, major enhancements, upgrades do you have per year? 1, 2 to 3, 4 to 6, 7, or unsure? Give everybody a chance to respond. Everybody's got to grab that mouse quickly, right? Okay. And the results are coming in, and I'll go ahead and close the poll and share the results. And it looks like we have a pretty interesting split of responses here. And we're going to move on to the next poll. How difficult is it to get sufficient dedicated time from business users? Not at all, not at all, somewhat, or very. And we'll go ahead and close the poll here. And share the results. Looks like we have another interesting split with most people agreeing it's somewhat difficult to get their business users time. And we have our third poll. Okay, let me go ahead and launch that. Do your business users know their processes and can they accurately describe them? Yes, they know them and can describe them accurately. Somewhat they know them, but sometimes describe incompletely, or no, they don't know them and can't describe them. And I'll go ahead and share the results. And looks like somewhat is the clear winner here. So with that, Mike will then take it back over.
Okay, all right. So why did we ask those questions, right? Well, when we look at this, we're talking about entering into a new world. You may be wondering, what did that have to do with S/4HANA? If we look at where SAP was in the past, we had the ASAP methodology, right, that we all knew and loved, the traditional waterfall approach. Well, now SAP has implemented Activate. And if you're implementing S/4HANA, you are going to use Activate as a methodology, whether you're using SAP, whether you're using a systems integrator. Everyone is moving towards Activate or Activate-based methodologies that are really agile and tailored for SAP. So we need to think about, what does that mean when we get into the actual project itself? I'm implementing S/4HANA. We look at this, most organizations are taking somewhat of a hybrid approach in our experience, what some might call agile fall, right? Where there is still some componentry of the waterfall approach, but most organizations are moving to this hybrid agile approach where they are doing sprints, and those sprints, of course, have functional team members, business team members, right? You've got technical team, all of those people working together in these sprint cycles to build out, create functionality, and all of that gets built, of course, has to be tested. And as part of sprint cycles, you're going to be doing your testing. So you're going to be doing that testing more frequently. So as we go through, it means that all of those people that have to be engaged, including the business users, are going to be required on a more ongoing basis. So how do we think about, how does that affect how we work? Okay, the frequency of updates is another thing that you have to take into consideration. So we asked the question about how often do you do updates, and I think the majority were somewhere between 1 and 3 or 4 updates, major updates a year. If you look at SAP with S/4HANA, you are now moving to a schedule of 4 updates a year. They have the initial release, the initial service pack stack, and then the release, the feature pack stacks. They also implement support pack stacks. So lots of other changes that are occurring. You have all of these that are happening as part of S/4HANA. You will have to take at least some of these updates yearly. If you look at this, this is one roadmap from SAP. This is just S/4HANA. There are also other roadmaps. There's a Fiori roadmap. There is a UI5 roadmap. Those also have their own release schedules. So what we're doing is we're starting to accumulate now changes that are going to be coming at us on a regular basis And if we haven't been prepared for that type of regular testing in the past, now we have a bit of a cultural change that we're going to have to account for. So if you look at the application landscape, right, the more teams that are using these kinds of applications means more often that you're going to have to do agile types of processes, which includes the testing. So we looked at who all is already using some type of SaaS-based application. If you look, S/4HANA is going to give you roughly 4 updates a year. In addition, you'll have these other applications. These are just some of the that we know of. So now if you start thinking about the fact that we have to test all of these on a regular basis, how do we manage that, right? This really starts to become complex. And this really makes me think back to a story that I heard somebody talk about at an ASUG presentation years ago that I thought was very interesting. He talked about how they had really just pushed through their process, pushed through the project, and he said, we had a very smooth go live, and that's when all the problems started. So what you have to think about is you're pushing through these projects to get these applications implemented, and that's just the beginning, because it can be as early as 1 quarter later, you're going to have to go through the cycle again with these updates. So when you think about the compounding factor of all this, so what we're really looking at is QA and testing is really entering a new world. We've got changing delivery cycles. We've got much broader audiences that we're going to have to work with and who have to be engaged on a regular, ongoing basis. And we're going to have to do that as efficiently as possible. We have a lot more teams and technologies that we have to support. So, you know, as the old approach of, you know, single line threading, you know, we get one project or one car handled at the drive-through, right? Now we've got more of this broader approach. It's a food court. We've got lots of things going on that have to be coordinated. And there have to be these ongoing operations behind the scenes to make that all work. So what we're seeing is that change management really is becoming much more of change monitoring. It becomes difficult to centrally control and manage all the changes. Changes are going to have to go through the typical testing gates that they always have had to go through. The testing cycles, that has to mirror the pace that the changes happen in the organization, and also the change that happens from the applications themselves. So a continuous testing becomes really critical to ensuring, again, backing up to not does my one single application work, but does my business process for my organization work end to end. That continuous testing really becomes critical. So for that, what it means is that the transformation, it requires ongoing change management. We have to reduce the cost of rework. We still have to stay within budgets. We have to deal with all of this increasing complexity. Bottom line is, when you start adding all of these together, manual testing and code-based testing approaches are not going to be sufficient. They are going to introduce risk, especially if you're writing code to test code. It's just not really going to scale. And that's what we've heard, and we've even heard that from a number of our clients. They've said eventually we hit a ceiling and we can't do any more with the traditional manual approach. So it all leads to the fact that automation is required. So in doing that, what we see is that to make that work, we have to get to a couple of different points. One is there has to be this collaboration across all of the different users. When we do that, we've got business users who are involved, developers, all of this driven around an Agile and DevOps approach. And so the tools that we're using have to be able to support that. So what is Worksoft's approach? Our platform really is designed around accelerating automation with tools that are accessible to multiple roles within a project across the organization. And it really is what we call transferable automation. So being able to document a business process, right, automatically, and then take that and convert that into documentation, to be able to convert that into testing, and then being able to scale that testing to run on a regular basis. So, for example, when we look at this, we really have to optimize the overall approach on all of the project team activities where we can. So we're really optimizing on multiple fronts. We're not just optimizing around the testing. We can automate the testing. There's more that can be done. If you're going to make these 4 to 6 week sprint cycle times, we have to be able to do things faster. So being able to allow the business users to automatically and independently capture their business processes and create test documentation. Think about what that would do. Think about the amount of time that you currently spend sitting with business users, doing screen captures, interviewing them, going back, writing documentation, going back, reviewing. Did I get this correct? A lot of time that happens there. If business is able to do this independently, we can optimize the use of their time, and we can maximize the value of the time that we require from them. That was why we asked before, how difficult is it to get the business users? And it's very difficult to have to go back. So let's get it right the first time. As part of that, we can also reduce the amount of effort that it takes to do knowledge transfer to the QA team. So when we take that, then we hand off what we've captured from the business users. We have the QA teams who then take that, those assets that they've created, and we're able to convert that and refactor that into automation that becomes reusable, that becomes resilient, and is able to be data-driven. And we can do all this without coding. So it reduces the time to create tests. It also increases our end-to-end coverage, allows us to have reusability. And then finally, we want to be able to do this at scale because we have to do this on a regular basis. You're going to run multiple sprints. So we need to be able to scale this up and really automate the execution of the automation. So we'll talk about how that works. So just to kind of set the stage here for what we're going to see in this first demo, we're talking about really using the Worksoft platform as we go through. Let's say we're in the first sprint and we have our teams, right? We have our functional SMEs. We have our, from the business, we have SAP expertise. We have testing teams. We're in this and we're going through this first sprint, and we are building out processes and need to start building out our testing. So let's take a look at how that works with our, pardon me, it's the right demo. Let's look at it. Okay, so in this demo, what we're looking at here is the business user. Business user is using Worksoft Capture, which you see in this right-hand window. They've turned it on, and they are simply executing their process. So say they've gone through and they're using just a standard SAP process, but they want to have this document because it has to be tested. You notice they're going through and entering their data values, creating this order, and you can see on the right-hand side that we're building out this capture because those screenshots is capturing the narrative of what they're doing. We're getting a very exact representation of what the business did as part of this. So at this point, what they've done is they've captured their process. So I'm in my sprint, I'm the business user, I need to be able to get this process captured, and I need to hand it off, right? So from there, what they're going to do is they will take that, and then they're going to save that, and they're going to save this to analyze. Worksoft Analyze is our product where we can do process discovery, representation. We're also able to generate other assets from that. So if you look, what we're going to do here is the user is now logged into Capture, and what they're doing is they're seeing a list of all of the captures. So what we just did was a capture of a business process. We called it Bike Paint 51. And I'm looking at that, and now I'm actually just filtering this for the one user. We also have other ways of being able to filter this, right? We can filter by activity flows. So if I can see all of my captures that I did as a business user during a sprint, or I can look at all of the different captures that have been done by different users, but who went through the exact same set of business process flows, different, say, transactions. Or I can look to see where we have repeated paths. And what that means is we've gone through and we've done the exact same steps on particular screens. So we know we're doing the exact same activity. In that case, what we want to do is, now that we know we've used particular screens in the same way, we've captured the data. Well, let's go ahead and just take that and export that, right? We've already got it in the system. Now what we can do in this case is we can also take for that same, I can create documentation. So the business user here is generating the documentation, and at the same time, they're generating the baseline automation. So what we'll see is that we now have the document has been created, automation has been created. So we'll have a look at some of the documentation here. Or first off, let's look at the data. So we talked about creating the data, exporting that. We can export the data that you've captured for over some period of time. Why would we want to do this? Well, one of the typical problems is, gosh, I don't know what test data to use. I have to go back to the business and ask them what test data should I be using. But the business has captured that test data already. Why not just make that available to be able to hand that over to the QA team? So here we have an example of the data that was entered on that particular screen. If I go over and look at my documents, I can launch the document. I can generate that document as a PDF. I can generate it as a Word document if you wanted to be able to take that and modify it. What you see here is an exact representation of every step the business user did with screen captures, along with the data values that they entered into the fields. So if I'm wondering how does a business user use a particular screen, what is their process, I have it right here. So think about the time that it typically takes to create documentation. And if you're going through these sprint cycles, if we can automate the testing, that's great. How can we optimize some other things that we do? Well, one is we can optimize on the documentation creation. We can take a lot of time out of the process in doing that. What we've done now is we've completed that work as the business user. Now let's say we've taken that, we generated that baseline automation, right? So if I come into certify as a QA team member, I can import the automation that they created. So this was a Fiori application. We're going to import this into our Fiori application and certify. And it tells us when we've imported that. So now you can see that we have a process that has been created where we have a parent process along with the sub processes. And if you notice, as we go into these, you'll see the exact same narrative with the exact same data that was entered and captured in the capture tool itself. So if you think about it, we have the language that we saw in the capture tool is the same as the language that appears in the documentation, and it's the same as the language that appears in certify as the test automation steps. What we've done now is we've said, well, I'd like to take those steps and I'd like to make this a data-driven test. So I want to be able to run this for multiple data variations. So what we've done is we've taken those steps, we've created what we call a layout, and from that, we now can import data and run that as a test. We can execute through multiple cycles of multiple rows of data. In this case, what we've also done is, and let me pause this for a second. So what we had was this process that began with the home, right? And as the automation team, we talked about building in, refactoring these tests and building in resilience into them. We want to have modularity and reusability. Well, one of the things we had is a reusable utility process, a Fiori logon. I can simply take that process that's been created and drag and drop that into the process that was created by the business user. And now I have the ability to, with this new test, I can take that and we can save it and it will actually run. And we're going to run this, we're running this using data that was brought in as a record set. So if you think about the data that we exported from Analyze, that data can be imported and used as what's called a record set and certified. If you notice now, as we're going through, this is moving pretty quickly. You're not seeing the little green circle appearing where we're clicking. The green circle is appearing because that was as we captured this. Well, this is all being executed by certify now. So you notice this is truly being automated. We actually had to put a delay in here to slow this down because had we not, that would have gone too quickly. Actually, we wouldn't have been able to see really what was happening. So there we have the results of the test, and you can see that it executed successfully. Okay, so coming back to certify. So we just talked about how can we use the platform to capture, to automate, generate baseline documentation that can be used for multiple purposes. Can be used for training, for testing, can be used as just that essential documentation of what is the business process as you're going through. As you go through subsequent sprints, you're going to continue to build on that library of automation that you built in your prior sprints. And you want to make sure that everything still continues to work, right? It has to be something that is, as subsequent sprints, that we're not breaking something that we built before. And we're also integrating all these together so that we're building out this library of test assets. So how do we do this in more of a CI/CD type of world that we're moving into, this continuous testing? So let's have a look at another video here. And well, technical difficulties here. Okay, so let's look at this. So this is an example of continuous integration with Jenkins. So what we've done here is that we're in the CI/CD process, and we're implementing a certified or integrating a certified test process into a build. So in Jenkins, we have initiated the build here, and we have kicked off in part of our platform is a product called Execution Manager. So we built the test and certify. From Jenkins, we've now kicked off Execution Manager, and Execution Manager is now executing that certified test on a, in this case, it's a virtual machine. This can be scaled up. We have customers who run Execution Manager on hundreds of virtual machines that they run nightly, so able to bring up a machine, run the tests, and then bring them back down. So it can be physical, can be virtual, something that can be done really on demand, or it can be on a scheduled basis. What you're seeing here is that we are actually going through and certify as executing the process on the virtual machine. So those same steps that you saw executing a moment ago, this is a slightly longer process where we've gone through and it's actually going to run across multiple applications. So right now we are in SAP Fiori, right? We are in S4HANA, and it's going through, and you'll see on this resource for this virtual machine, we're actually able to see what is going on that machine as the test is being executed. So if you think about this, the capability of Execution Manager here, right, is that as we are building up these tests, we have more and more tests. In the past, the more and more tests that you build up in your library, the longer it takes to execute them. The more resources you have to have, the more people you have to execute them. The concept of doing large-scale test execution on demand is very, very difficult if you're doing manual testing. That's the sort of thing that has to be scheduled well in advance. If you think about testing, then that's going to require business users as well. Go back to the point, how difficult is it to get the business users' time? It's pretty difficult. So in this scenario, what we're able to do is kick this off, and really we're able to run this, and we have this integrated with Jenkins. We are able to integrate with Solution Manager, HPALM, any one of a number of tools. I'm just going to click forward here just in the interest of time. So what you can see here as we go through this test is that not only are we able, as part of one end-to-end process, we test within SAP GUI, but then we are also testing within the SAP GUI, so the traditional SAP interface that we all know. Okay, so Execution Manager completes, and we can see the test has completed. And when we come back to Jenkins, we see that the certify process had failed, which we knew, right? We actually factored that into our process when we built that, so that you're able to see how a failure looks in the certify when you're looking at the results. Okay. So coming back to the presentation. So again, what is our goal, right, with this automation? The goal is we want to lower the cost, right? The total cost of it's not just TCO, it's the cost of a project implementation. We need to be able to get an ROI on that, right? I mean, ultimately it's about the dollars. So when we're doing this, we're really talking about optimizing what we do on multiple fronts. And really, that's the key here. So we're able to leverage that business process knowledge. We're able to automatically, we can create test automation, and then we can automate that automation. We can execute those tests in an automated way using Execution Manager. On the right, when we're talking about optimizing, we're optimizing on not just the project front or on the application front, but if you look at the numbers here, this is from a recent IDC study who looked at some of our customers, and what they found were really some very significant benefits of using Worksoft. So, the ROI, right? 5-year ROI of over 500%. Payback of 7 months. In the previous study that was done several years back, I think it was around 11 months. So as the product has improved, even though the applications have gotten much more complex, customers are getting a faster payback on the investment. So, 83% less staff time, right? 60% faster to maintain test scripts. So really significant savings and improvements that we're able to get through the use of the Worksoft platform. Okay, so back to the key considerations, right? So the things that, to take away from this is that think about the context of S/4HANA. Think about everything that's going on. Change, there's opportunity, there's risk. Change is the absolute constant in this. You are going to have change, whether it's product updates, feature packs, support packs. We always have, the SAP notes, or show my age, what we used to call OSS notes, right? The things we have to apply patches. You apply those. You don't just apply those without testing. You always have to test them. Now we have more components in the architecture that can be updated at any point in time. So automation really does become a must, and that continuous testing really becomes a must. And SAP, as I said, is just one part of that end-to-end business process. So we're looking at going from a traditional ECC into an S/4HANA implementation. One of our customers had talked to us, and we asked them about how their business processes ran. They said, not every process starts in SAP or ends in SAP, but every single one of them runs through SAP at some point. So it really is the digital core. And with that, we're talking about a major change in going from ECC to S/4HANA. If you're going to do that, and we know that business process spans other applications beyond just SAP, it really makes sense to get started building your test automation before you embark on that S/4HANA project. Because you can build out the testing around those other applications in that business process. And as you built out the testing for ECC, then as you move into S/4HANA, right, it's a matter of now building out tested for the new business processes. If you're testing SAP GUI today, SAP GUI is going to be there in S/4HANA in the future. So there's a good chance that tests that you build today will still have some value and can even be run as is in many cases in your S/4HANA system. So it's not a complete start from scratch, right? Something to keep in mind there. The way that we do the work, right? So S/4HANA Activate means that you're going agile. And in order to be able to meet these kinds of project deadlines and sprint cycle times, we have to optimize on not just the project activities that we're going to do, but also the resources. And in talking about the project activities, we're doing this across phases. This is not just testing. So we're talking about key considerations for testing for S/4HANA. When you look at the Worksoft platform, it really is structured in a way that it benefits you across project phases. So it can be used early on in the life cycle to start documenting what your business processes are. You can use it to document what your business processes are today, right, in your applications. So We have optimized around the testing, we've optimized around being able to build out process and documentation, and we've optimized around the ability to execute the test at scale. So bottom line is what we're able to do with the Worksoft platform is to really optimize around your test automation, but also how your teams work and how that project functions, how the activities get executed in a project, not just during the project, but as well in the post-go live world, right? So once you're into ongoing maintenance and support, 3 months from now, you'll have that quarterly update that you need to take, whether it's from S/4HANA or whether it's from some other SaaS application. There's going to be constant changes